Good morning, all. I Chetana HD, Assistant Professor from the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, Vidyavardhaka College of Engineering. I welcome all of you for a second day workshop on beginner's course in web programming. Welcome you all. Now, I request Mr. Amogh to take over the session.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, good morning, all. I hope that you had a good day yesterday and that you enjoyed the session. Yesterday, let's just do a small recap of yesterday, right? We learned about how we can write HTML, how we can create a HTML file, a HTML document, write out the basic structure that is required for HTML, and how we can build a very basic functioning website through HTML, right? Today, what we're going to do is we're going to build upon that foundation. We're going to use the same concepts that we learned yesterday and make it a little bit more presentable, right? So today we're going to be covering CSS. CSS is short for cascading style sheets, right? I mentioned yesterday that HTML was, it's considered to be the skeleton of the website, right? If you consider a human body, we have the skeleton, and every skeleton is more or less the same, right? But what makes a person different is the flesh, the skin that is there on top of that skeleton, right? And in terms of HTML and CSS, the same holds true, right? HTML will be the skeleton and CSS will be the skin, okay? So like I mentioned before, CSS is short for cascading style sheet. Now there is actually a short story behind this as well. When HTML was first released in 1993, Tim Berners-Lee and other people that started using this new programming language, that started using this new technology, they found out that certain things were becoming a challenge, right? For example, some websites or some of the documents that they created, right, didn't need to be in the format of a document because everything looked like a document at this point in time. And they felt that, if HTML could be used as something different other than just as a platform to share documentation, then so be it, right? The HTML working group, and by this time the W3 consortium, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, came about with a plan of releasing an addendum or releasing something, another programming language in this case, that would benefit people that use HTML, right? And this was called CSS. And CSS is responsible for how a website looks or how an HTML document looks. So yesterday, I also made a small point that HTML was mainly related to the content of the website, right? If you take a website, whatever content that you want to put, for example, if you want to put images, or if you want to put a list of items, or if you want to put headings, all of that would go into your HTML file. But CSS, on the other hand, is not like that. CSS is responsible for the presentation of that particular HTML document, right? Let us imagine that we want to change certain aspects of how the website looks or how that HTML document looks. Let's imagine that we have a heading 1 tag, right? And we want to make it look bigger. With cascading style sheets or with CSS, it is very easy to do that. We can just set a property that says, I want the font size to be so big. And when you load up the document again, the font size will actually take on that property. So that is the beauty of CSS, right? CSS, we need to keep in mind that CSS is very simple, right? Just like the HTML that we saw yesterday, we are not dealing with a very complex programming language. It is very, very simple, right? So if you want to change something, for example, if you want to change the background of something to a different color, we can do that, right? It's very easy. So we just set a property called background, okay? And then give it a value of red, right? Or let's imagine that we want to change the height of a certain element, right? Let's say that we want to change the height of an image, right? So we would set the attribute called height or the property called height and assign it a value of 10 pixels. So this would ensure that the height of that particular image is now 10 pixels. So if you would have noticed from the previous two examples, we are following a very, a very concise syntax, right? We follow a name value syntax, a name value style syntax. So let me just go back, right? In this example, if you take a look at it, we have background, which is the name of the property, and red, which is the value of that property, right? So a name value syntax. Now, if you remember yesterday's session, we also had a name value pair over there. When we are setting attributes, we use the name value property. But the syntax is slightly different in HTML, right? In HTML, we would say, we would put in the name of the attribute, then we would put in an equal to sign, and then a double quote, and put in the value of the property within that double quote, right? But in CSS, it's a little bit different, right? So in CSS, we put in the name of the property, right? Follow it up with a semicolon, sorry, with a colon. Okay, we follow it up with a colon, as you can see highlighted over here. And then we put in the value, okay, that we want for that particular property. And then we end it off with a semicolon. So let me repeat again. We add in the name of the property. We follow it up with a colon. We add in the value that we want the property to take, right? And then we end it with a semicolon. Now, it's important that we follow this syntax, right? In certain cases, the semicolon is not important, but in other situations, for example, if you have another property that is coming in after this, then the semicolon is very important, right? But I urge you that you do put a semicolon at the end of every property so that we can avoid unnecessary errors. Okay. So where do we write this code, right? We've seen, with HTML, we have a document and, we add in the HTML tag and we add in the body tag, and then we write all our tags within the body tag, right? But how would that work with CSS, right? Where do we put the CSS code in? So it's still very similar, right? We still work within the same HTML document, right? So we still have the same, HTML tag at the top. We have the body tag, we have the head tag within that, and then we have the body tag after that. And now the difference that we see here is that we have a new tag within body, right? This is called as a style tag. And the style tag is still very similar to what we, to all the other HTML tags that we have seen so far, right? We open the style tag with a left angle bracket, follow it up with the name of the tag, which is a style in this case. Then we put in the right angle bracket, right? And then we write all our properties, right? And then we close the tag by putting in a left angle bracket, following it up with a forward slash, adding in the name of the tag, and closing it with a right angle bracket. Okay, so you might have noticed that there is something different here, right? Up until now, when I spoke about CSS, we have only seen a name and value, right? But over here, it's slightly different. If you can notice, we also now have something different here, right? We have a dot red followed by a flower bracket, and the background red is within that. So what exactly is this dot red? Let me explain, right? So if we consider a paragraph tag, right, a p tag in HTML with an attribute class and a value of red, right? We would use that. Okay, we would use that red class, the value that we specified within the attribute. We would use that in CSS to set different properties, right? This ensures that whatever, only the elements or only the tags which have a class of red, okay, will get the property of background red, or will get a red background, right? So let's look at it, right? Let's break this down a little bit more, right? HTML has two tags that are common for every, two attributes that are common for every tags, right? We have class and we have an ID. And you might remember yesterday that I told you IDs and classes are used in, are used to refer to that particular tag outside of HTML, right? That is, we use it in other programming languages like CSS and JavaScript. And we do that by using the period operator and the hashtag operator or the pound operator, right? So the dot is used to specify a class attribute. So if we have an element or we have an HTML tag with the attribute class and the value red in CSS to target that particular tag, to target that particular element, HTML element, we would say period red followed by the flower brackets, and then we would put in whatever properties that we want to put in within the flower brackets, right? We can have multiple properties in CSS. It's not just related to one. It's not, you cannot, it's not just one property that we can put. You can use multiple properties in CSS. Okay, and if we have if you have a paragraph tag with an ID of red, right, we would use the hashtag operator in CSS to target that particular tag, and then use the red value, open the flower brackets, and then put in all the properties within that. Okay, so just to be a little bit more clear, if we have this particular tag, if we have a p tag with an attribute of class which has a value red, in CSS we would target that particular attribute or that particular tag with dot red or period red, open the flower brackets, and add in all the properties within that. Okay, and similarly, if we have an HTML element or a HTML tag with an attribute of ID which has a value of red, in CSS we would refer to that as hashtag red with flower brackets, right? We open the flower brackets and then put in up different properties within the flower brackets. Okay, so these are called selectors. The dot red and the hashtag red that you see, these are called selectors, right? These are called CSS selectors. So this syntax is very important to keep in mind because we use this a lot in CSS, right? Not only is this used in CSS, this is also used, the same syntax, the very same syntax is also used in JavaScript, right? Modern forms of JavaScript especially use this syntax, whereas the old ones omit the dot and the hashtag and rather use the actual names, the ID and the class. Okay, so we'll come back to JavaScript a little bit later on. We have a session lined up for tomorrow where we'll discuss JavaScript, but it's important to keep this in mind. It's important that we know how to select HTML elements so that we can write properties for them in CSS, right? Okay, now we have seen a couple of properties so far, right? But I've mentioned over the last two slides that we can have multiple properties, that we can have multiple, it's not just one single property that you can write within a selector, right? You can write multiple different properties. Okay, so let's just take a look at some of the properties. Now I have gone ahead and segregated these properties into different aspects, right? Into different under different headings so that it's easier for us to follow. Okay, so we'll start off first with dimensions, right? And we have seen one of these in the examples previously. We have seen height, right? But let's start off with width. So if you consider, a Cartesian plane, we have the x coordinate and we have the y. We have the x-axis and the y-axis, right? And within the x-axis and the y-axis, we can, if we plot a particular point, we can get the x and the y coordinates for it, right? Now HTML works very similar to the x and the y coordinates, the x in the Cartesian system, right? The width of your screen will be along the x-axis and the height of the screen will be along the y-axis, right? Now the browser, depending on the size of your screen, right? The browser is going to determine what that height and the width is going to be, right? But each element, each tag, okay, each tag that you create within an HTML document can also have dimensions, right? It can also have dimensions, and for that you can specify the width and the height. Okay, so for example, if we say that an element, tag has a width of 10 centimeter and a height of 10 centimeter, right? This would form a square, okay? And this is an example for that. This is an HTML element which is 10 centimeters wide and 10 centimeters, which is 10 centimeters wide and 10 centimeters high, which is a perfect square, right? I have added a background color red just so that you can see what, the boundaries that it occupies, right? So this is a square, which is 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. Okay. Now, you might have seen that I've used centimeters as a unit for measurement, right? CSS allows you to, use a lot of different units of measurements, right? On a day-to-day basis, we use a lot of different units of measurements, right? We use millimeters, we use centimeters, we use meters, we use kilometers. We have, we have inches, we have foot. Well, on the on HTML and CSS, it's very much the same, right? Although we cannot use every single one of those units, there are units, some units among them that we can use, right? For example, we can use centimeters, and we have already seen an example of this, right? We can use millimeters, okay? We can use inches, right? And probably the most common that you're going to see people using when building websites or when working with HTML and CSS is pixels, right? Now, pixels is a very unique concept to the world of computers, right? We have seen pixels in a lot of things. Of late, we have seen phones that have come out with different megapixel cameras, and there are pixels used in them as well, right? And your screens on your computers and your phones, they also contain pixels, right? Now, it's not easy for, it's not easy to determine how much exactly one pixel is, right? Because it changes from device to device. So imagine that you have a computer monitor from early 1990s or early 2000s, right? One pixel on that would be totally different to a monitor or a laptop from today, right? A modern laptop from today. Or one pixel on a modern laptop or a modern computer will be much more smaller, right, than one pixel that you would see on a monitor from the early 2000s. And the reason for this is that it's the reason for this is to do with how each of these are represented on the hardware level, right? But for the sake of simplicity and for the sake of being getting in some sort of standard within the web world, the W3 consortium or the World Wide Web Consortium or the HTML working group, what they have decided is that we will consider one pixel to be 1/96th of an inch. So one pixel is equal to 1/96th of an inch, right? Now, you don't really need to keep this measurement or this conversion in mind because you will not use it that often. But it's good to know because you might be wondering what exactly a pixel is, and well, now you know. Okay, so these, whatever I have spoken about so far, right, the centimeters, the millimeters, the inches, and the pixels, all of these are absolute units of measurement, right? So for example, if I say something is 10 centimeters, it is exactly going to be 10 centimeters. It's not going to be 1 centimeter, it's not going to be 2 centimeters, it's not going to be 11, it's not going to be 12, it's going to be exactly 10 centimeters, right? The same goes with millimeters as well, and the same with inches and pixels. But on the other hand, modern internet or modern web, the way it works is a little bit different to that, right? We cannot expect that everyone has a monitor or everyone has a laptop that is the same size, right? And most often the case, this is not, it's not the case, right? People have different devices, people have different screen sizes. So, what might be 10 centimeters on my screen might be different, for someone else. 10 centimeters might be bigger or it might be smaller for them, right? So what we use mostly in web, apart from pixels, is something called as relative measurements, right? So relative measurements work on the basis of relativity, right? So it's in relation to something. So there are a few measurements that we can use here. There are a few units of measurements that we can use under relative, right? The first one is percentage. Now, percentage is relative to the parent element. So let's imagine that I have a paragraph tag for which I have set a width of 200 centimeters, right? Now 200 centimeters is big, it's very big, right? If I say 10% or if I say 50% of 50% for something for a child element, for example, right? So within that paragraph tag, if I have another paragraph tag, right, and in CSS I say the width for that is 50%, it'll be 50% of that 200 centimeters, right? It'll be 100 centimeters, which is half of what 200 is, right? So you can see where this is going, right? If we have an absolute width, or if we have a width that we already know, now we can very easily make relative measurements, right? And this will be very useful when we are dealing with different screen sizes. For example, let's imagine that the width of my laptop is probably 4 inches, right, or 6 inches, for example, right? Now, if I design a website that look perfectly well on my laptop, right, on my laptop, and then I take it and put it on a different computer, right? What will end up happening is that it'll look totally different because I've used absolute units. I've said all my widths are 6 inches, and it's not more than that. So if that computer, for example, is big, then it's not going to fill out the entire screen. If it is, say, for example, 10 inches, right, then 4 inches is just empty white space. It's only going to fill out the 6 inches because that's what I designed the website to be like. But on the other hand, if we use percentage widths, right, if I say 100%, right, so it's always going to take up 100% of the screen, right? So it's important to note here as well that the relation, if you are on the main body tag, 100% would be related to the width of the screen, right? So if I say a paragraph is 100%, right, so it's going to take up 6 inches on my laptop, and it might take up 10 inches, the full 10 inches on a different, on a different laptop or a monitor, right? So that's percentage, right? We also have one more unit of measurement that is very frequently used, and this is called EM, right, which is short for element. Okay, so this is relative to the font size of the element. So let's continue with the example of a paragraph tag, right? A paragraph tag is usually 16 pixels big, right? 16 pixels is the perfect font size where you can read without having to squint your eyes, without having to strain your eyes, right? So if a paragraph tag is 16 pixels, right, and I say that I now want it to be another paragraph tag within that, I want that to be 2 EM. That would be twice 16 pixels, so that would be 32 pixels. And 3 EM would be 3 times 16 pixels, right? So that would be 16 times 3, right? So that's how EM works. Now, a unit that is very much related to EM is called REM, right? So if, for example, so this REM works more or less very similarly to EM. The only difference being that, REM will take in the font size of the root element. So for example, for the entire document, if we have set the font size to be a particular, for example, if you've set it to be 20 pixels, right? REM, 1 REM would be 20 pixels, 2 REM would be 40 pixels. And, if we set something to REM, even if the parent of that has an, font size of 100 pixels, it's not going to take that into consideration. It is still going to work with what the font size for the document is. Okay, so those are dimensions and those are widths. Okay, now let's move on to the next one, right? Okay, so keeping in line with the same dimension, it's important to know that every element in HTML comes in 2 types of different formats, right? We can call them as display formats, right? So one is a block level element and the other is an inline block element. So let me just explain what these are, right? A block level element will always have 100% of the width, right? No matter what it is. Like for example, a paragraph tag is always 100% width, no matter what the situation is, right? So if you write a paragraph tag and you take it, you put it on one screen which is 6 inches, for example, it is going to be 6 inches big, 6 inches in width. And if you take it and put it on a screen with 10 inches width, it's going to be 10 inches width. It's going to be 10 inches wide. So that is called a block level element. Now there are several elements that by default are block level elements, right? Paragraph tags are one of them. Remember the div tag that we spoke about yesterday? Div tags are another example of block level elements, right? Images are also block level elements to a certain extent, right? The other display format is inline block, and these elements they're a little bit different, right, when compared to block. The reason being that these will occupy only as much width as it's necessary for that element to occupy, right? So if you can take a look at these examples here, I've put a red background to to determine how big this particular element is, right? So this is a block level element, the one that says I am 100% in width. This is a block level element, and it's going to take up 100% of its parent, right? In this example, the parent for this would be this li tag, right? So this will be 100% in width of that particular element, okay? Inline block level element, on the other hand, I've written out a text that says I am as big as the text. And you can see that there is not much space before and after the element, right? It's, perfectly, it starts where the text starts and it ends where the text ends, right? So it's just as big as the content. Now, the reason why I bring up block level elements and inline block level elements is because this will play a very crucial role to bring about certain design elements into picture, right? So we will be using this extensively in the example that we were working with yesterday, the workshop, the cafe workshop website that we were working with yesterday, right? We will be using this concept, and I will demonstrate this for you in the practical session as well, right? Okay, now let's go on to the next slide. And we will talk about colors now, right? We have already seen this in action, right? We have seen background red being used here, right? The background for this is red, right? So we have two types of colors that we can set, right? One is the color for the text itself and the color for the background, okay? There's a slight difference in how we, how we set the colors for each of these. And it's important that we not get confused when using these properties, right? For the text, okay, we will be working with the property called color, right? Whereas on the other hand, for background colors, we'll be using the property called background, right? So color is the property color is going to set the color for a text element, right? So a text element would be anything like a heading tag or, anchor tag or a UL, an unordered list of items, or even a paragraph, right? So anything that has text in it, we can, we can set the color for that by using the property color, right? And specifying the value. For backgrounds, we use a property called background, and then we set the value to the name of the color, right? Now, in terms of colors, right, we can specify colors in 3 different ways. This might get a little bit technical, but please bear with me. This is pretty simple, right? It's not as complicated as it looks, right? So we can specify colors in 3 ways in HTML. One is by using color names, right? Like red, white, black, gray, silver, yellow, and so on and so forth, right? The other is to use RGB, right? Now, RGB is a standard way of signifying or representing color in the digital world, right? RGB stands for red, green, and blue. And, red, green, and blue, a combination of these 3 colors will form whatever color that you see on the internet or whatever color that you see on any digital platform, right? Whether it's a television or whether it's, anything else, even your smartphone for that matter, right? So red, green, and blue. So you specify a value for red, you specify a value for green, and you specify a value for blue, right? So we write out RGB followed by a bracket, and then a list of comma separated values where the first value corresponds to red, right? The second value corresponds to green, and the third value corresponds to blue. And the range for each of these is between 0 and 255, right? Where 0 is for black and 255 is for white. Okay. Now, the third way that we can, the third and the most popular way that we can specify colors in HTML and CSS is by using something called as a hex code. Now, hex stands for hexadecimal, right? And we use the hexadecimal values of red, green, and blue colors in order to specify a color value. So, for example, if we take RGB of 000, right, this would be a black color. This would be black color, right? This in hexadecimal form will look like this. It will look like 000000, right? Now you might have noticed that we're using a hashtag symbol in front of this. This is purely because we need to let the computer know, or we need to let the browser know that this is a hexadecimal value. And this same format is used in multiple different languages. You might have seen this in C, you might have seen this in Java, you might have seen this in a couple of other languages. So this is the best way that you can let a computer know that, hey boss, the next set of values are actually hexadecimal and they're not binary. Okay. So don't let us not confuse this with the ID selector that we've seen before, right? This hashtag is only used in front of color values, and you can only use this within values. You cannot use this as a selector, or you cannot use this as a property. Okay. Okay. Now let's move on, right? Now, one other common thing that you will see a lot of websites use is something called as borders, right? You might have seen borders yourself. If you have a textbook, if you've seen books, you will have seen borders being used in multiple places, right? Now, this, to specify a border, to get a border for input for a particular element in CSS, we have to set 3 properties, right? And if you don't set even a single one of this property, the border won't show up, right? So let's just see what these 3 are, right? So we specify the border width, we specify a border color, and we specify a border style. Let's start with the width, right? The property for this would be border hyphen width, right? And we're setting this to be 1 pixel, right? So this would create a border which is 1 pixel in width, right? Now the border color property is going to use border hyphen color, right? And we can set this to any one of the color values that we have learned about, right? We can, for example, we can have it in red color, or we can have it in white color, or we can have it in black color, right? So for this example, I'm going with red, right? Now, the last property that we're looking at is called as border style. And border style accepts 3 values, okay? Over here, we can see that we have gone with solid, okay? And I will show you in a moment what this will be like, right? But you can also pass in, apart from solid, you can also pass in dotted and dashed, right? So if it's solid, it would create a solid border. If it is dotted, it would create a dotted border like ... And if it's dashed, it would create a dashed border around the element, right? So if you don't set even a single one of these properties, remember that the border is not going to work, okay? So let's take an example of this, right? Let's see how this works. So over here, I have a p tag, right? And I've, for the content I've written that I have a border on all sides, okay? Now in the CSS, what I've done is I have used the selector as the p tag, right? And I have mentioned that the border width for this is 1 pixel. The border style for this is solid, and the border color is red. Okay, and we can see it over here, right? This is rendered above. I have a border on all sides written. This is the p tag, right? And all around it, we have a red border, which is 1 pixel in length, okay, or 1 pixel in width. Okay, so one other important thing that you might have noticed here is the fact that I have, instead of using a class or instead of using an ID, I have passed in the name of the tag over here in CSS, right? So this is something that we can do, right? This is most definitely valid, and this will work. And I will show you examples of this when we are working with the practical part of the session, right? But keep in mind that when we're doing like this, when we're using a tag name and we are specifying the properties within that, what ends up happening that if your document has more than one paragraph tag, right? If you have, let us say, 4 paragraph tags, right? Then this piece of CSS code is going to put a border around all 4 of those paragraph tags, which is something that you might not want, which is why we be a little bit more specific, okay, and say that, okay, boss, I don't want all of my paragraph tags to have a border around them. So I will use a class name, and then I will use a class name as a selector in CSS, and I will put in the value for that, the properties for that. Okay, great. Now, the next thing that we're going to discuss is font sizes. Now, we have already seen this. We've already seen this mentioned in a couple of other properties before this, right? For example, we were taking a look at how we can specify, values in EM and in REM, right? How we can, use those units, and they depend on something called as a font size, right? Now. One thing that most people forget when they're working with HTML and CSS is that HTML and CSS is mostly, or just HTML is mostly content, right? We write a lot of text. We use a lot of images, and this text needs to be legible enough that people will actually be able to read it without too much, without straining their eyes too much, right? And this is the reason why we use font sizes. Okay. Now, to define a font size for a particular text element, right, much like the color, we just use it, we just define a property called font-size, right? And then we set the value for that to be pixels. Okay. I do have an example of this in the next slide. So let me go ahead and show that to you. Here, we have a paragraph tag, right? And then I'm seeing that this is 16 pixels in size, right? And then I say that the font size for this is 16 pixels. And you can see on the top that it says I am 16 pixels in size, right? And it's 16 pixels. So that is the size that it would render the text out in. That is what 16 pixels would be, right? But you might have noticed something else, by this point. You might have noticed that I have created a different way of representing a CSS property, right? So far, we used to putting a CSS property within a style tag, and then writing the selector for that particular element, and then writing out the property within the flower brackets, right, or the curly brackets. That is perfectly valid, and that is the most recommended way to write CSS. But you also need to understand that we can write CSS in this way as well, right? For example, let us say that we want this particular paragraph tag, just this particular paragraph tag to be in 16 pixels, right? Just to be to have font size of 16 pixels. So we would create an attribute called style, right? And then we would give it a value with a font size 16 pixels. And the values for the style attribute will be just the CSS syntax that you're used to. So if you want to add another property after this, you would just give a space and then you would write another property. Right? So just keep in mind that this is also a valid way of writing CSS. Now, continuing with the same example, I have taken the same paragraph tag. I have taken the same style attribute, but this time I've set the font size to be 22 pixels instead, right? And you can see the difference in the font size. So I'll just go back and forth between the two. And now you can see that, this is 16 pixels in size, and this is now 22 pixels in size. Okay, great. Now, like I've mentioned just a few minutes before in this workshop, HTML is mainly content, right? Whatever content happens, we are going to be doing that in HTML. Let us say that you want to write about you're building a website for you're building a website about a person, right? And you want to write a little bit about the person. All of that would still be done in HTML. You would not write the content in CSS, right? And there's a lot of emphasis on text in HTML, so much so that CSS was actually invented to format set text, right? Of course, we can still use a lot of default things in HTML to get a certain sort of formatting in place. For example, we can use different sizes of heading tags, we can use paragraph tags, and so on and so forth. We can use lists. All of that is perfectly valid, right? But you cannot do anything more than that. And that is why CSS was born, right? To format text better. So when we talk about formatting text, there are a few different things that we're going to be talking about, right? We're going to be talking about alignment. We're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about what style it is in, like whether is a text bold, is a text italic, is a text underline, so on and so forth. So let's start off with the alignment aspect of it, right? Now, text can be aligned in three different ways. It can either be left aligned, which is the default. It can be right aligned, which is what you would see in languages like Arabic and other right to left languages, right? And you can also center align text. Now, this is mainly created with different text and different languages in mind. Like, for example, Arabic being right to left as opposed to English, which is left to right, and most of the languages being left to right. People have started using the alignment tag as a stylistic choice, right? They use left and right aligns and center aligns to beautify their HTML website, right? So if you want to center align text, we use the property called text-align, and then we set the value to be center. If you want to left align the text, which is the default that the browser will set the text to, we would do text-align is left, right? And then if you want to right align text, we would do text-align, and we would set the value to right, okay? Now, if you want to underline text, we would use a property called text-decoration. And we would set the property, we would set the value for that to be underline. Now, text decoration has a lot of different uses. Underline is just one of them, right? Underline is one of them, and it's probably the most used, value for the property text decoration, right? And I will show you how each of these will look like shortly when we go on to the practical session, okay? And if you want to bold text or if you want to italicize text, we would use the property called text-style, and we would set the property to either bold or to italic. Great. Now, let's just go back to one of the topics that we have already discussed before, right? Let us go back to selectors. We spoke about different ways that we can target or that we can select HTML elements within CSS files, right? We spoke about class names. We spoke about ID names. We also spoke about tag names, right? We can, for example, write the name of a tag, for example, P, and open the flower brackets and write all of the properties within that. And we can also have, in the HTML, we can add in an attribute called style, and then we can write the CSS properties within that as well. All of these are perfectly valid ways to use CSS selectors. But there is one other selector that we can use. So we have already seen class, right? Dot class would refer to a HTML element which has a class of class, right? And hashtag ID would refer to a HTML tag that had an ID of ID, right? And this is how we can also do a named tag, right? For example, if we want to target all the paragraph tags within a HTML document, you would put the name of the tag, which in this case is P, open the flower brackets, and then we would write the list of properties, right? Now, the other thing that we can also use CSS selectors for, the one other method that we can use CSS selectors as, is called as a pseudo-selector. Right? A pseudo-selector works in this way. Right? Before we move on to pseudo-selectors, I just lightly like to touch up on why this is needed, right? So when CSS was first launched, this was something that was never there with the initial versions of CSS, by the way, right? Pseudo selectors are more common. I mean, they're more modern, and they're only being used a lot these days, right? They were not they didn't exist when CSS was first launched back in the day, right? The reason why pseudo selectors were needed was because as applications as websites got complex, more and more complex, you started having a lot of elements within the screen on the screen, right, that would demand for your attention. Right, you could have an image, for example. You could go to a website and you would have an image over there that was blinking, right? That would blink in two different colors, and your eye would be immediately drawn to that, right? And you would go there, and it would probably be an advertisement about something that you would need to buy, right? Now, what tended to happen was that as websites started doing these kinds of things, it got a little bit hard for people to actually interact with the website, right? For example, when we type on a keyboard, right, we know that when we have pressed a key, because we can feel it with a finger. When the key goes in, we know that yes, the key has been pressed, and we also get a tactile feedback in form of a sound, right? When we press a key on a keyboard, there is a click sound that comes, right? So our brain will know that, oh, okay, the key has been pressed because I felt my finger going in, and I heard the click, right? But on a software, or on a website, that is kind of hard to achieve, right? Let us imagine that you have a button, right? How do you know that you have pressed the button, or that you are supposed to press the button, or how do you know that that isn't even in fact a button, right? Pseudo selectors were invented for this very reason, right? Amongst other reasons, but this is one of the major factors that contributed to its creation, right? Now, one of the most popular pseudo selectors that are used is called the hover pseudo selector, right? So how this would work is that whenever you define this pseudo selector, whenever you hover over an element, you can change the properties of how that element would be displayed, right? Or how that element would change, right? And this is important because let us imagine that you have a button, right? And you bring your mouse over that particular button, and then you suddenly see that, oh wait, it's just changed color. Or does this mean that I can click on it? And that's what your brain would process it as, right? And that is exactly why the pseudo selector is used. So how do we define a pseudo selector, right? We put in the name of a tag, and then we use a colon right after the tag without a space, right? And then we put in the name of the pseudo selector, which in this case is hover, right? And then we would open the flower brackets as usual, and then we would write in our properties, right? So great. That is how we can define pseudo selectors. So pseudo selectors can be used to decide when we want to do what we want to do when a user hovers over something, right? So let's imagine that when a user hovers over a piece of text, we want it to turn red, right? And we can do that with the help of pseudo selectors. And we can define a color called a property called color red, which change the text color to red when the user hovers over it. Let's see a small demonstration of this, right? We have a paragraph tag over here, right, which says I turn red when I'm hovered over, right? And then I have defined a CSS selector over here that says p colon hover with the color of red. So what happens is when I hover over this paragraph tag, it now turns red. Right? Amazing. Okay. So this is this is one of the ways that CSS can help improve the user experience of a website, right? And this is something that we need to keep in mind. This is something very, very important that we need to keep in mind, because as your website gets more and more complicated, as it gets, as you start adding more and more elements to it, you know, there are lots of, there'll end up being a lot of elements on the screen that will start fighting for visual attention with the user, right? And that is when we make use of things like pseudo-selectors like hover and other thing in order to separate out, separate out things from the noise. Okay, great. Now let's move on to the practical session. Right, you can follow along with me, by the way, by using the same website that we visited yesterday. You can go to codepen.io, which is codepen.io, right, and follow along with me. You can just create a new pen at the top over here, right, as I'm going to do now. And okay, and we will start off, right? So in this practical session, we'll be covering a lot of ground, right? Towards the towards the latter end of this practical session, we will be continuing the project that we took up yesterday, which is the website for the cafe, and with the HTML that we have from the previous day. What we will be doing now is we will be taking it and we will be adding some styles to it with whatever we have learned in this session, right? And making it a little bit more presentable. Okay, so let's get started, right? Okay, now the first thing that I would like to do is recap certain things that we learned yesterday, right? Just so that you have a more clear understanding of what we're working with, right? So how would you, how would you write a HTML document? You would start off with the HTML tag, right? Then you would put in a head tag. Within this, you can put a title tag, for example, and say that this is called, my first website. Then you close the title tag, okay? And then you close the head tag, okay? Then you open a body tag. Then you close the body tag. Now, something that I forgot to mention yesterday is that it's important that you close the tags in HTML, right? Although modern browsers are pretty capable of, sorting out errors on their own, it'll end up leading, if you have not closed a tag, for example, it'll end up leading to unforeseen consequences with your HTML page, right? It's not going to break, but then you might start seeing that the design is a little bit off, right? So just keep that in mind. Always remember to close your HTML tags. Okay, great. Now within this body tag, let's create a heading tag, a h1 tag, which says, hey, I'm heading 1, right? Okay, and now you can see that on the right hand side it says, hey, I'm heading 1. Okay, great. Okay, now let's start off with CSS as well, right? Let's initially start off by defining CSS within a style tag, right? So you would define a style tag right after you open the body tag. This ensures that when a browser is going through an HTML file, it sees the style tags first, it evaluates them, and then starts applying these styles. When it starts rendering the output for the HTML document, right? So I'm going to open a left angle bracket. I'm going to type in style. I'm going to close the right angle bracket, drop to a new line, and I'm actually going to close this by opening the left angle bracket, typing in the /, and then putting the name of the tag, which is style, and then closing it. Okay, great, right? And as we wait for that to reload, we don't see any major difference because we have not added any properties. Okay. So let us say that I want to change the color of this to red, right? Let's see how we would do that. One way is to obviously add a class over here, right? So I'm going to add a class called red. Okay. And then in CSS, imagine now this is the the text that we want to change the color for. This has a class of red in the HTML, right? So in CSS, I would refer to that by putting a period, right? Typing in the value of the class, or the name of the class, which is red in this case. Okay, opening a flower bracket, closing the flower bracket, dropping to a new line, okay, and then adding in the property. So if I want to change the color, the text color, I would say COLOR, which is the name of the property, and then the value of red, right? And if you just wait for it to reload, we can see that it has actually changed the color for that element to red. Amazing, right? This is what you can do with CSS and HTML. This is the power that you can, that you have with HTML and CSS. Okay, now let's change things a little bit, right? Now what I'm going to do is, and this is primarily the reason why I chose to work with this. The moment I start making changes, you can see how it's going to react to it, right? So just to give you an idea of how HTML and CSS works together, I'm going to change this class for the H1 tag over here, right? I'm going to change it to ID, right? And I'm going to say the ID is red. Now you can see that the color is back to black. It's no longer red. Why is that? We have used, we said the H1 is going to be, it's going to have an attribute called ID, which has a value of red, or which has a name of red. But in a style sheet, you might see that that is not the case, right? We are still using dot red, right? We need to use, if you want to target that particular heading, we need to, it no longer has a class now, right? It has an ID. So a dot will not work here. We need to use a hashtag, right? Or the pound symbol, right? So if I put in a hashtag and wait for it to load, you can now see that it's back to a red color. Great. Okay. Now, I'm going to delete this entire style tag, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove this ID as well, right? And I'm going to put in an attribute called style over here, okay? How do I write an attribute? I write the name of the attribute, I put an equal to symbol, and then I open the double quotes, right? And then I enter the value. Within this, I would say now COLOR is red, put in the semicolon, wait for it to load, and now you can see that it is, heading 1. Now there's a couple of different things that I would like to, point out here. So let's just change this color from red to green, okay? That's a bold color, we can see that. So you can see that now it's green in color, right? Now what I would like to do is I would like to go back and add a class to this, right? A class is equal to red, right? Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to create the style tag again. So I will type in STYLE, sorry, STYLE, okay? And then I am going to close the tag, okay? And over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to target that particular heading tag, right? I'm going to write red, okay? And then I have a question, right? What do you think will happen if I say color is red? Do you think that this will change its color to red? Well, let's see, okay? So I'm going to type in color, and then I'm going to give it a value of red, okay? We wait for it to load, but nothing's happened. It's not changed its color to red, right? And the reason for this is because there is a priority that the browser assigns when it deals with CSS selectors, or that CSS assigns when it deals with CSS selectors, right? The first order of priority is always going to be, the first order of priority is going to be whatever you put in within the style tag, right? On top of this, above this is the next priority, right? Which has greater priority than the style sheet, is going to be this, okay? The inline style tag that we're using, right? The inline style or the style attribute that we're using over here, that will have a greater property, that will have a greater priority than whatever you define within the style tag. And the reason for this is because it's twofold, right? Let's imagine that you have 2 headings. I'm going to go ahead and create 2 headings, right? And I'm going to create I'm going to say that the class for this is red, and hey, I am another heading is what I'm going to say, and I'm going to close the heading tag, right? Now we have two heading tags over here, right? And we can see that, hey, I am another heading is actually red in color because it has a class of red, and within the style sheet, I have said that all classes with the name of red is to have a text color of red, right? But it's not changed the color for this, right? And the reason is because we have a style tag within the first heading, okay, where we are saying that the color only for this heading is to be green, right? And so this is this is how CSS prioritizes what color, what selector to choose, right? Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and show you one more thing, right? I'm going to delete the classes and the style tag from this, okay? Right? I'm going to delete the class as well from the first heading. I'm going to delete the class from this as well. Okay. Now, if you wait for it to load, you can see that nothing's happened. It's gone back to, being black again. But in the style sheet, we have actually, said this has to have a class of red. And, all elements that have a class of red will have a text color red, right? Let's change this to H1, right? This is one of the other selectors that we can use, if you remember, right? So if you have H1, if you have H1 as the selector, you can now see that it's both of them are now red in color, okay? Which is great, right? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the second heading tag, and I'm going to assign a class for this, okay? And we're going to add in a class called red, okay, or a class called green, okay. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new class called green, open the flower brackets, and then I'm going to assign the property for this as green, okay. And now if you wait for it to load, we can see that the second heading now changed to green color. The reason for this is because we have added a class called green, and this has a greater priority than this selector, right? Than the H1 selector. So HTML and CSS, how they work is they go from the top of the file to the bottom of the file. Okay, they're going to look at everything that they see in terms of the different properties and all of it, and then it's going to execute them line by line. So if it encounters the H1 property first, the H1 selector first, it's going to execute that, right? And then if you have the dot green selector next, that'll have a higher priority over whatever. So it's going to replace whatever happens previously, right? Okay. So now that we have that understanding in mind, let's look at a few different things, okay? I'm going to delete these two styles as well so that we are a little bit more organized, okay? So I'm going to drop to one more line here. I'm going to go back up. Now I'm going to create a div, okay? Now this div tag, I'm going to leave empty, and I'm going to show you why, okay? Now within the style tag, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a selector called div, okay? I've created a selector called div, and I'm going to assign the width for this to be 10 centimeter, okay? And then I'm going to assign the height for this to also be 10 centimeter, okay? Now you cannot see just how big this div is right at this moment. I cannot see anything over there, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign a background color to this, okay? I'm going to say background for this is red in color. And as we save that, we can see that, we get a red square, which is 10 centimeter big and 10 centimeter wide, right? 10 centimeter wide and 10 centimeter high. So let's change this, right? Let's change it to 15 centimeter. Let's change the height to 15 centimeter. And now we can see that, we have a rectangle, which is 10 centimeter wide and 15 centimeter high. So let's work with pixels, okay? I'm going to change the value from centimeter to pixels, and let us see what we get, okay? So you might not be able to see this, it's very small, but that is how small 10 pixels and 10 pixels by 15 pixels is. It's very small, we cannot see it, right? So I'm just going to change this to 100 pixels by 150 pixels, okay? And now we can see that it's a little bit more bigger, and this is how it will look like. Okay. Now we can change the background color to something else. We can change it to green, for example. Okay, and it's now going to have a green color background. Okay, we can change it to black. Okay, and it's now going to have a black color background. Okay, great. Now, if we remember our presentation, I mentioned that we can actually use various. We have different ways of representing colors, right? So we have. Let me just bring it up. Okay, so we have one is the named. We can use red, white, black, and we've seen that, right? The other way is that we can use RGB. So let's try using RGB, right? I'm going to use the same property from here. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go back, and then where it says background, in place of black, I'm going to paste in RGB, open brackets, 0, 0, 0, close the brackets. And now you can see that, it's going to show you, it's going to show you a rectangle with a black background or a black color, right? Okay. Now the opposite end of the spread. So you can try experimenting with RGB values, right? So this can go all the way from 0 to 255. So let's try changing this to around 100, right? 100, 0, 0 will give you brown color. Okay. Now what happens if we change the value of blue to 100? So you're going to get this sort of green, this shade of green, right? And now if I change the value of blue as well to 100, okay, this is what we're going to get. We're going to get a shade of, a lighter shade of black, which would, which would be called gray normally. Okay, all right. So if you do 255, which is the maximum that we can go, okay, again 255 and 255 for blue as well. We will not see anything because that is white in color. So just to show you that it exists, I am now going to add a border for this element, right? I'm going to add a border for this. And how I'm going to do that is by using the 3 properties that we discussed previously, right? So if you remember, border is going to be set by 3 properties, one of which is border width, which I'm going to say is 1 pixel big. Okay. Border style, which is solid. Okay. And border color, which is red. Okay. Now, if you notice, okay, I'm just going to make this a little bit more big. I'm going to make it 5 pixels. I'm going to make the width 5 pixels. Now you can see that we have a box, where it would be with a background of white, which is 100 pixels wide by 150 pixels high, and it has a border which is 5 pixels wide with a style of solid and a border color of red. Okay. Now let's just let's play around with the border style property, right? Now I'm going to make this DOTTED. So if I make this dotted, you will shortly see that it now has dots in place of a solid, a solid red line. It now has red dots all around it, right? And similarly, if I change dotted to DASHED, it's going to have dashes in place of dots, right? And that's how it would look like. Okay, great. Now, there is actually an easy way for us to set this border property, right? You don't have to specify all of these 3 properties. Instead, CSS gives us something called as a shorthand property, right? So we are going to do border. Okay, we're going to say 1 pixels. Okay, which is we're going to say 5 pixels. Then we're going to say SOLID, which is the border type, right? The border style. And then we're going to say the color for this is going to be red. So the first, the first property would be the first property that we're going to set is going to be the width. The second is going to be the style, and the third is going to be the color. And we would get this, right? So with just one single property and 3 different values, we can set a border property without having to type out 3 individual properties for each. Okay, great. Now, while we are on, on the subject of color, let us also see what we can do with hexadecimal, right? So hexadecimal is split into three different, it's split into three different values, right? So we have six. It's a six-digit hexadecimal code that we're going to type, right? So the first two is going to be for red. The second two is going to be for blue, and the last two is going to be for green. Okay, and when we set this, we see that it is now a black color. And if I set the hexadecimal for 255, 255, 255 is going to be FFF, because that is the maximum value that hexadecimal offers, right? So we go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F, right? So 10 would be A, 11 would be B, 12 would be C, 13 would be D, 14 would be E, 15 would be F. Great. So if I set this to F, 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 okay, this is now going to be white in color. Okay, and if I set this to something in between, like if I set this to 80, 80, 80, or 88888, we are going to see something that looks like this. We're going to see a gray color. Okay, there we go. All right, great. Now that we have covered color, the different ways that you can express color, right? Let's look at something a little bit more interesting, right? We've covered borders, we have covered, right? Let's look at font sizes, okay? So I'm going to bring back the HTML. I'm going to bring back the heading tag, right? So I'm going to delete the div. I'm going to say h1, right? And I'm going to say, hey, I am a very big heading, right? And I'm going to close the h1 tag, right? And now here, let me just delete whatever styles we have written. And I'm going to say the selector for this is going to be h1, and the property is going to be font hyphen size, okay, to be 60 pixels. Okay, let's see what we get with that. Now you can see that it's very big, right? I've set it to 60 pixels and it's very big. Now, there's one small thing that I'd like to point out over here, right? When we're working with fonts, there is something called as there's something called as serif fonts, which is what you're seeing right now. Serif fonts have these, they have these on letters like H. You have you have a backtick at the top over here, right? And in capitals. These are the fonts that are used in newspapers, right? And it's sometimes very hard to read on media like screen, right? If you have like a phone, a small phone screen, it becomes very hard to read these types of fonts. Your eyes will be straining a lot, and they're much more suited for print, right? Let's leave it at that. So we can change this as well, right? And we can change that by using a property called font family, okay? And we have two different types of font families, right? We have serif, which is what this is, right? So I will just put in serif over there, and we will see that there is no change. Then there is also another property called sans serif, right? Which means it does not have serif. And I do that by typing in sans hyphen serif. And as we wait for this to load, we can now see that there is no backticks on the hedge, on the eyes, on this hedge. We just have a normal font, right? So this is something very important when you're dealing with design. You can change the font that you're using. You can change, whether it is a serif font or whether it's a sans serif font. You can do that, right? So amazing. Okay. Let's also see what else we can do here, right? So let's try out text formatting. Okay. So we have. I'm going to leave it like that. Probably I'm going to reduce the size of this back to 30 pixels so that we can see what we're working with, right? So you can see that this is left aligned, right? This text is left aligned by default, right? Now I'm going to change that, and I'm going to move it all the way over to the right. And I do that by doing text hyphen align is to right. Okay, and as we wait for it to load, we can see that the font has now gone, the text has now gone towards the right side of the screen. Okay, which is what text align right does. Okay, now if we change this to center, this will come to the center of the screen. Okay, and if we wait for it, we can see that it is now in the center of the screen. Amazing. Okay, and if we change it back to left, it's going to go back to the left of the screen, right? Let's look at a few other things as well, right? I'm going to put this to center so that, okay, right. Now let's underline this text, right? So to underline text, we use text decoration, okay? And then we say it is underlined. And now if you wait for it to load, you can now see that there is actually an underline beneath this text. Okay, great. Now it might be a little bit hard for me to show you bold and italics on this, but let me try, right? On heading tags especially. So I'm going to say the text style for this is going to be normal, right? If I do normal, it's going to lose that bolded property. Okay, it didn't lose the bolded property. Let me just check. Okay, here's what we will do, right? Let's create a new tag called, let's create a new paragraph tag, and then let's assign the values to that. Okay, so I'm going to say, hey, I am bold. Okay, and you can now see that it is very small. Let's make it a little bit more bigger so that everyone can see what we're working with, right? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to create in the style sheet, I'm going to create a selector called P, open the curly brackets. I'm going to set the font style for this, the font size for this to be 20 pixels, okay? And as we wait for that to load, we can see that it's now become big, okay? Let's make that 25 pixels actually, okay? So a little bit more big. Great. Now I'm going to change the font style for this to be bold. Okay. And as we wait for it, oh, sorry, it's not font style, it is text style. Okay. Ah, yeah. Okay, let's get back to this. Now, this is one way that we can, make a text bold. The other way is that we can also make it bold using a tag called a B tag or a bold tag, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a B tag within the P tag around the text, right? So we can now see that this is actually now bold, right? So what I'm going to do now is, let's say that we just want the hey to be highlighted, right? So now we're going to close the B tag right here, okay? Oops. And then I'm going to delete the last one. Okay. I'm going to delete this. And now we can see that it's just the hey that is being highlighted. Okay, great. All right. Okay. Now, finally, let's take a look at pseudo-selectors before we move on to the practical session, right? Before we move on to the creating the website that we were working on yesterday, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create in the style sheet, I'm going to create a P is to hover, right? Which is how we define a pseudo-selector. And then I'm going to change the color for this to red, okay? Now, when I hover over the text, I'm getting my mouse here. So here's my mouse. I hope you can see it. When I'm getting it over this, it's going to change the color to red. Okay. Here's my mouse. When I get it over it, it's going to change the color to red. Okay. Amazing. Okay. Let's go back to what we were working with yesterday, right? So we're going to open two tabs over here. We're going to work with the design as well as what we were working with yesterday. Okay. So just give me a moment. Great. So we were working with this yesterday. Okay. And this is where we left things off. Let's wait for it to load. So this is what we were working with yesterday. Okay. let's wait for the images to load. Yeah, this is what we were working with yesterday. And you can see that we now have, a new image, and we have the input tags that we were working, the form that we were working with, right? And now let's go back to what I showed you yesterday, right? Let's open that up as well, and let's see how that looks like. Okay, so now you can see that at the top we have home, about, menu, and contact, right? And we have that, but instead of being in a bulleted list, it's in a single straight line. So how do we go about doing that? Well, let's do it, right? So in this example, on CodePen, what I suggest you do is you put all your HTML, only the tags, right? Whatever goes within the body tags, I suggest that you put them in this HTML field over here in this text box, right? And whatever CSS you want to write, you can write it in the CSS field over here, right? This will make it very easy for you to, without having to type in the HTML boilerplate all the time. You don't have to type in the HTML tag, the head tag, the body tag all the time. If you want to learn very quickly, this is, something that you can do, right? You can accelerate the process by doing it this way, okay? So I have this UL tag, which is the unordered list, right? Which is what we are working with over here, okay? Let me put that over here, right? So in CSS, I'm going to say that this is, I'm going to select that. I'm going to open it, and then I'm going to set a property called list style type, okay? And then I'm going to say none. Okay, now you can see that, the bullets have actually vanished, right? Now I can set this to something like numbered, and then you can see that it has now numbers towards the left side. If I say this is bulleted, and wait for it to load, sorry, bullets, right? Wait for it to load. You can see that it now has it in bullets. Okay, so great. Let's go back to none. Now we are slightly there, we don't have the bullets over here, and we don't have the bullets over here as well. This is great, but if you notice here, it's on a single line. Now you might be wondering why, how I can get it into a single line. Now we need to go back to what we were talking about previously, right? During the presentation, I told you about inline block elements and about block elements, right? Inline block elements are elements that will occupy only as much width as the content it has, right? But now these li tags that we have, these li tags, they are actually full width, right? They're block level elements, so they occupy 100% of the width, okay? And just to demonstrate this for you, I'm going to create UL li. I'm going to drop down, and I'm going to set the background for this as red. Just wait for it to load, and we see that it's taking up the entire space, right? Which is not ideal, which is not what we want. So we can change this just so that it occupies just as much as its content has, okay? And we do that by saying display for this is inline hyphen block. Okay, so when we do display inline hyphen block, this is what we get. Now we can see, if you go back and forth between this, we can see that it's now in a single line, but this is a lot more spaced out, right? So how do we do that? How do we space it out a little bit more? Well, you might have noticed something else that I created here in the CSS, right? I, for the selector, I said UL, and then I put a space and said li. The reason for this is because if you look at the HTML that we have a UL tag. The child of that UL tag is an li tag, right? So if you put a space, it means that it's going to select the child of the UL, right? And the child of the UL is li, so this is what the selector that we ended up using, right? So CSS can be as specific and not as non-specific as you want, right? So if you just want to say, okay, I'm going to add a class that has this, I'm going to do that, right? So let's just add a class as well and see what's going to happen, right? So I'm going to add a class called, you know, menu item, or I'm going to say nav item, which is because it's a navigation element. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy this, you know, and then I'm going to paste it in all of the li tags. Okay, there, gone and pasted it. Okay, and then I'm going to change this to dot nav item. Great. So dot nav item, and it should still work the same. Okay. Now let's remove this background red. All right. I don't want that. Okay. So now we are closer to where we want to be. Okay. Now let's set the width for this element, right? So we have four items on this menu, right? We have 4 items in this menu. So if if you consider 100% of width, 100 by 4 would be 25%. But in reality, each element occupies a little bit more than that, right? So instead of setting 25%, I'm going to set it as 22%, right? And we'll see what we work with. So if we set it as 22%, we can now see that it's spaced out and that we have it in a single line, much like what we are working with over here. Okay, but there's still a little bit of way to go because we need to set a background color for this, right? So let's do that, right? Let's set a background color of gray, right? But you might have noticed now that there are these weird white spaces in between this, and this is not what we expect it to look like at all, right? The reason for that is because we are specifying the background property within the list item, right? And each list item is 22% wide, as you can see here, and that is not what we want it to be, right? We want instead to set the background element on the parent item. And when we do that, what ends up happening is that, but you can still see, right, that it's a little bit more bigger, it has more space and all of that. So how do we achieve that, right? There is a property in CSS called padding, and it adds extra space around an element, right? So I'm going to say padding, and I'm going to say this is 24 pixels, right? An arbitrary number, 24 pixels, and there we go. It works fine. Okay, great. Now, yeah, now that works fine. Okay, so this looks more or less like this, but you can see that the background color is probably lighter. So instead of gray, I'm going to do a like GHTERGREY, lighter gray, right? And wait for it to load. Okay, sorry, it's light gray. My bad. So it's light gray. And now you can see that we are more or less close to where we want to be. But you can see that these text elements over here, they're actually still blue in color and they have an underline, right? So let's sort this issue out with whatever we have already learned, right? So we're going to go inside and we have an anchor tag within each of these elements, right? I'm going to set a class for them to be, nav hyphen link, and then I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to copy this and then I'm going to paste it in front of every nav element. Okay, so I'm going to paste it, nav link. I'm going to go here, paste it. I'm going to go to the last one and paste it. Right. So there we have. Now let's go back to the CSS and target that selector, right? So nav hyphen link. I'm going to open the curly brackets and then I'm going to first change the color for that to black, right? So how do we change the color? We say color and we say it is BLACK. Now, once we do that, we can see that we are more or less where we want to be, right? But we can still see the underline. Now, remember what we spoke of, when I told you about underline, we have a property called text style, right? And if we set it to underline, sorry, text decoration, my bad. And if we set it to underline, it will show an underline beneath the item. We've seen this in the previous example, right? But now we don't want an underline, over there. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove it. And how are we going to remove it? We are going to set the property to none. And when we set it to none, you can now see that, all of these are as they should be. Okay, now let's do one more thing as well, right? I don't, this text is always centered to the left. I want it centered to the center within that element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the nav item and then I'm going to say text align is to center, right? Now let's wait for it to load and we can see that we are closer to where we want to be, right? Great, amazing. Okay, now the thing is, you might have noticed that there's padding or there's some spacing all around, all these elements. Now this is something that the browser sets by default, and we can remove that, right? Now, in order to select every single, selector, every single HTML element in existence, we use the asterisk selector, right? So we put a star, open the flower brackets, and then we're going to say margin, which is another property, right? It adds margin all around, and then we're going to set it to 0. And now you can see that there is no longer any padding, okay, around any of the things. Now that's great, right? Now the other thing that we should also probably sort out while we are here is, if you can notice, these are all sans serif fonts. These are all sans serif fonts. They are not serif fonts, right? So we should go ahead and change the font family for all elements within the HTML document to sans serif. Okay. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and do that. And now we can see that we are where we want it to be, right? But there are still some things that we need to to sort out here. And let's go ahead and do that, right? Now, if you look at this, this heading needs to be bigger. Okay, so let's sort that issue out, right? So here what I'm doing is I've set a h1 tag which says cafe workshop, right? And if you scroll down further, we also have a heading tag called our menu, which is also a h1 tag, right? And if you look at the design that we have here, we have done the same thing, right? This is also the same size as the text on top, the heading on top, and this is also center aligned, right? So let's go ahead and do that. Let's add a selector for h1, right? Let's add a selector for h1 over here, okay, in the file that we are working with. So h1, we're going to open a new this thing. We're going to say text hyphen align. We're going to center this, okay, great. And then we're going to change the font size of this to something bigger, okay? So we're going to change the font size of this to 40 pixels. And let's see if that'll get us where we need to be. Okay, 40 pixels does not make a lot of difference. So let's change it to 60 pixels. Okay, that's closer to where we want it to be, right? But now one of the other things that you might have noticed is that there's lots of space above the headings, right? So how do we do that? We can just add that by using the padding property. Now the padding property is a shorthand property like we saw for border, right? So the first value, if you just set one value for this, it's going to add a padding all around it, right? But if you set two values for this, the first value will be the padding for the top and the bottom, and the second value will be the padding for the left and the right. So now we want to add padding for the top and the bottom. So I'm going to do this as 24 pixels, and then I'm going to give a space, and then I'm going to say 0 pixels because I don't want any padding on the left and the right. Okay, so when we do that, we now see that we have padding on the top and the bottom. I can probably make this 40 pixels, and it'll look a little bit more better. There we go. So it's 40 pixels now. Okay, great. And if you scroll down, we can also see that the our menu text and the leave as your feedback text is now centered and it's big, and it has padding on the top and on the bottom. Okay, great. Now we have these paragraph tags over here. You might have noticed that we have paragraph tags which say, hey, we are a new cafe that's open in town and we offer a variety of dishes and your feedback is important to us, right? They're all paragraph tags. And if you look at the design, we can see that they are all center aligned, right? So let's do that. Let's go ahead and do that, right? Let's center align them. So it's very simple. We're again going to, target the paragraph tag. We're going to say font, we're going to say text align is to center, right? And we can probably add, a padding on the top and the bottom as well. So 24 pixels, 0, and that is what we are working with. So great. Now, you know what we'll do here? I'm going to say padding hyphen bottom, which is how you can set individual padding. So the other properties for this will be padding hyphen top, padding hyphen right, padding hyphen bottom, padding hyphen left, right? So great. So padding bottom, I'm going to do 24 pixels. So it's just going to add padding at the bottom of that. Now, okay. That looks great, Okay, great. Now, if you scroll down, we can also see that these text, they are also highlighted, they're also center aligned, and they have padding on the bottom. Okay, great. Now, the next thing that we want to do is that we want to move. If you look at the design over here, it's actually center aligned, right? That image is center aligned. So we can remedy that in a very easy way. What we're going to do is actually we have image tags everywhere, right? We have image tags. So let's create a selector for image over here. Okay. Once I select, once I create that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make use of one of CSS, one of the browser's default ways of automatically calculating the center of a page, right? So how it does that is if I set the display for this to be block, which is the default, right? And then I say margin, I say so I'm going to assign two values to this, right? The first value is the padding for the top and the bottom, right? This I'm going to set it to 0. Probably I'll say 10 pixels, right? So we can have some padding on the top and the bottom for in between images. And then the next value that I'm going to set is called auto. So what auto does is when I change the height of this, right? When I change the width of this, it's going to take into account that okay, it's auto. So let me calculate how much the width of the screen is, and depending on that, I will divide it by 2, assign it to the left, and assign it to the right. So that's what the auto is going to do, right? So it's all automatically calculated by by the browser, and we don't have to break our heads on determining, what a particular screen size for this device is. Okay, great. Now, if you look at it, and if you scroll down, you can see that, it's more or less how we want it to be. But if you look at the design over here, we have two things going on, right? We have the list of all these dishes on the right-hand side of the image, but over here we have it one below the other. Well, that's amazing. That's great. And we can remedy this in a very easy way, right? So if you look at, the code, okay, we have written over here, we have an image tag, right? We have an image tag, and we say that the width for this is 800 and the height for this is 600, right? And below that, we say, we have a list of all these dishes, right? Dish 1, dish 2. They're all unordered lists, right? Oh, sorry, they're all ordered lists, so they're numbered. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to target this by adding a class, okay? So I'm going to call it a menu, okay? I'm going to go back to my CSS, right? And I'm going to add a selector for dot menu. I'm going to open it, and I'm going to set the width for this to be 20%, okay? And now if you come down and if you look at it, okay, we can still see that it's one below the other. But what I want you to remember is this, right? We have said previously that all image tags in this document, are going to be centered, and we don't want that, right? So let's go ahead and remedy that, right? Let's go ahead and add a class to just this image, right? To just this image, which is the first image that we can see over here, right? So I'm going to add a class to this, okay? And I'm going to call it main, IMAGE, okay? Okay. And then I'm going to come to the CSS, and then I'm going to rename this image selector to be image hyphen, sorry, main hyphen image. And now we can see that only that is this thing. So now we can see this is, left aligned. But there's one additional thing that we will need to do, right? So where we have our menu, I'm going to give this again an ID of, I'm going to give this a class of menu image. Okay. I'm going to give this a class of menu image, and I'm going to come down here. I'm going to target this, and then I'm going to call this display. I'm going to make this an inline block. Okay. That way it will only occupy as much width as it needs, right? So I'm going to do display inline block, and I'm going to do the same. I'm going to add a class for menu. We have already added that. I'm going to go ahead and change that, and I'm going to do display is to inline block. Okay, and now if you see, we have an image over here on the left hand side, which is the menu image, and on the right hand side we have this. Great. Okay. Now, one thing that we might have noticed is that the image is a little bit too small, right? So let's go ahead and experiment with sizes, right? I'm going to do 800, and I'm going to set the height to 600. And if you come down here and you notice, it's a little bit too big. So let's reduce it. Let's do 500 by 300 or 350, right? Let's see what we work with over there. Okay, if I scroll down, great, that is perfect, right? Now I'm going to add a little bit of, to this image, I'm going to add a little bit of margin on the left hand side, right? So I'm going to do margin left. I'm going to say 40 pixels, right? So now I can see that it is the same. Now, one other thing that you might have noticed is that the set of dishes is actually aligned to the top of this, right? And we can do that in a very simple way. We'll go to the image and we will set a property called vertical align, right? Which will allow you to align text alongside an image vertically. And I'm going to say vertical align top. And as we wait for it to refresh, we can now see that it is aligned to the top. Now, one other small change that I would like to make here is I want to make this a little bit more bigger. Okay. So let me go back to the class that we are targeting for this list, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say dot menu. And remember that if we want to select a child tag, I put a space and I put in the name of the tag, and then I'm going to say font size is 24 pixels. Okay, each of this is going to be 24 pixels big. Probably I can make it 20 pixels. There we go, that is perfect. And then I'm going to say padding 10 pixels. Okay, let's see what we work with. Great. I don't want 10 pixels. Let's do it 5. Let's make it 5. Okay, so perfect. That looks exactly like we want it to look. And we can probably even add a margin to the left of this, right? Margin left, 20 pixels. Okay, great. Now this is, looking more or less like what we want it to look over here, right? We have different images, but they more or less work the same. Now, the one thing that we will need to change is the forms. If you notice at the bottom, they're very small, they're hardly visible, and they all are they're next to each other, right? So let's just go ahead and take a look at what the HTML for that looks like, okay? If we see, we have a form, and within the form, we have several input tags, right? So let's go ahead and do that, okay? So in the CSS, let's create a form element, or, we don't even need that. We can just do input, I can say display block, right? And width 100%. Okay, probably I don't want 100%. Let's make it 50%. Okay, and that's what we're going to get. Now what I want to do is I also want to increase the font size so that it's visible. I'm going to make this 20 pixels. Okay, there. It's much more visible now. It's much more legible, right? And I'm also going to add a small padding. Okay, so you will see immediately what effect this has, right? So I'm going to make this 10 pixels. And now you can see that the text field is a lot more bigger and it's a lot more legible, right? So I'm going to change this back to 16 pixels, okay? There. All right. Now the one other thing that I would like to do is I want to add a margin for, again, 10 pixels. This will space it out a little and ensure that the text fields are readable. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to change that margin to 24 so that it's a little bit more visible, right? But you might have noticed that only the first two have changed in appearance, right? The last, the message input field is still only so much. And the reason for this is because that is actually not an input tag. It's a text area tag, if you can notice here, right? So let's go ahead and create a new a new selector for text area. And then I'm going to copy whatever I've done for the input, and then I'm going to paste it. And now you can see that it looks the same, right? But now, if you notice, if you go back here, we can see that the button actually has a yellow color background, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and I'm going to change that, right? How do we do that? This has an input type of submit. Now I'm going to give this an ID. Okay, I'm going to say that this is submit PUTTON. All right. So nothing major should change. We're still going to be, we're still going to have that. Okay, and I'm going to come down and I'm going to now remember that we created an ID and not a class. So we're going to say hashtag input button, right? And now I'm going to change the background of this to KHAKI, khaki color, right? Just give me a moment. I think there is a spelling mistake. Yeah, I think that should be submit button and not input button. Okay. Okay, great. There we go. But you might notice that there's this weird black color thing all around it, right? Well, that can be that's called a border, and that can be easily removed. So BORDER is to none, and there we go. It removes the border. Okay. Now let's add a small padding to this as well, right? I'm going to say the padding for this is 24 pixels. And there we can see big and bold, right? So if you look at this, we are very close to where we want to be, right? And now we can center this entire thing out by targeting the form element, the form tag, and then saying display is to block, okay, and margin is to 0 auto. And we wait for it to load. Okay, I'm going to specify the width for this is 70%, and I'm going to remove the widths within the input, right? So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to say the width for that is actually 100%. Okay, there we go. And the width for this is again 100%. Sorry, my bad, 100%. Right, and there we go. So great. We now have something that looks similar to this. Okay, and we have something that looks very similar. Okay, great. All right. Okay, now we have covered HTML and we have covered CSS. After this session is done for today, I suggest that you go ahead and you practice whatever I've taught you so far. You practice whatever we have seen. You practice whatever all the tags that all the style, all the CSS things that you've learned today, and just get a hang of how the entire thing works. Right. Once that is done, we will continue tomorrow with the JavaScript part of it, and we will use some of the same concepts that we've seen today in CSS to see what we can do, how we can make a website more interactive with CSS. Okay. All right. I think I can take some questions now.
Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, sir.
Hello.
The session was very informative, sir. As we don't have any
Thank you.
questions posted on the chat box, so
Okay.
we can meet you tomorrow at 11 o'clock, sir.
Sure, ma'am. No problem.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I
Thank you.
thank all the participants for attending this second day workshop on beginners course in web programming. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.